Welcome to the Compliance Experts Podcast, hosted by VARTAN Consultancy. Miles Vartan and his guests, as experts in compliance and risk management, will guide you carefully and with clarity through the many sectors of compliance like health and safety, ISO and operator licenses, and the complexity of customs regulations. They'll also be talking about the latest legislation, global trade news, and the hot topics as they happen.
Good morning and welcome to Series 2, Episode 2. And with me today I have Nicky Robertson from Woodbridge Digital Media, based in Suffolk, and looking forward, Nicky, to getting established on the Sizewell C project.
Thanks, Miles. Nice to be here. Yes, we've been engaging with Sizewell C for some time now, and with other people in the supply chain across Suffolk for this enormous construction project. So yeah, exciting times ahead.
They are exciting times, Nicky, and I was on site last week. The scale of the operation and the construction is phenomenal. You can see Sizewell B dome in the distance, but you quickly focus on everything, all the work that's going on. We're looking for a go-live date in terms of the pre-enabling work in the summer, but already you can see preparation work in line with those obligations. So as a business, we are involved with various people bidding for work at Sizewell C, including ourselves. We've put tenders in for giving a fire advice, and we're helping a logistics company at the moment. When you drive down the A14 from Ipswich to Felixstowe, you pass the Allwell Logistics Park, which is going to have about 500 seats in the various office spaces there. There are lots of yellow signs saying this way to Sizewell. You can see the preparation work on the park and rides, and there are two park and rides, one south to north, which is going to be on the Wickham Market Junction, and north to south at Darsham Railway Station. There is already work on the bypasses.
Yeah, I can't actually imagine it because I think I visited Leiston about a year and a half ago, and it was fairly quiet and things hadn't really kicked off.
Yeah.
So to actually know that the groundworks are starting, it's making it all real for people in Suffolk, and it seems to have been a long time coming.
So all directions lead you to Lovers Lane. That is this colloquially named road. But when you get on site, you see the massive ACA building that is all basically temporary modular building that will be there for the life of the project and the base of many meetings and strategic thinking. But of course, when electricity starts to get generated, all this has to be put back to good. It is a challenging project.
And I think quite different. Although there's a lot of replication, there are different challenges here in Suffolk to those that they're finding at Hinkley Point C in Somerset.
Absolutely.
Because the actual nature of the site is, and the access to the site is quite different.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be all hands to the pump to get it delivered on time. But the fact that it's actually started and you can start to see work happening means that it's very real now.
That's right. And when you think about it, Hinkley has got the M5, come off at Bridgewater, turn right, 11 minutes later you're on site. With Sizewell, you have the A14, which leads onto the A12, which leads you onto the B1122. So there's not a motorway in sight. We colloquially here say the nearest motorway is in Holland. So yeah, big changes, big differences in terms of accessing the site logistically. Your business, Nicky, has been involved at Hinkley. You've worked for a number of the tier ones down there in terms of creating visual communications.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Give us a couple of examples of how that has helped the project and how you've got involved.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of coming at it from a sort of back to front perspective. Woodbridge Visual Communications is really born out of the experience that I've had working for Hinkley Point C and EDF at Hinkley Point C for their communications team. And it seems like an age ago. It started about 2015 when I went into their offices in Bridgewater and said, do you need some help with your visual communications? And they said, well, in a bit, we're still waiting for, the final investment decision, the FID. But, stay in touch. And prior to that, I'd actually been working for the BBC as the regional journalist for that area. I'd left the BBC, I'd started my own business, wasn't quite sure. I was doing quite a lot of corporate video, but wasn't quite sure where that was going to lead me. And on the basis of that experience, right from the beginning, right from where they were putting up the fence around the site, which was obviously still masses of green fields, very difficult to imagine it today, what it was then. So a bit like Sizewell C, and we worked with the Gurkha security detail to film the very basic groundworks that were starting. And as the years rolled by, we became more involved. My company, Mendit Media, became more involved with the visual recording of the activities on site. So when they first got the very first big diggers in, we were recording that. And today we're working much more with the compliance side. So a lot of health and safety training, a lot of literal training about, how to be a slinger, which is the part where you help to get heavy loads lifted, because they have hundreds of cranes. So most of the stuff is lifted into position. They've got the biggest crane in the world, Big Carl, and the cranes are absolutely fundamental to being able to build this type of site. And the exciting thing about Hinckley is that it's bringing back a whole generation of lost knowledge. Over the generations, we've lost the knowledge of how to build nuclear construction. But in those years, those intervening years, innovations happened, and certainly innovation in construction. So one of the tier ones that we work with at Hinckley is called Bylaw. And Bylaw is a joint venture between Bouygues, which is a French company, and Lang O'Rourke. And although they won't be working on Sizewell as a joint venture, they are working as their own companies in part of the Sizewell C Tier 1. And the innovations that they've created on site and have been allowed to create in terms of producing modular rebar construction, using the cranes as the lifting device, so they can actually manufacture on site in an area that's away from the actual location where the nuclear facility is going to be built, and then they can lift it into position. So it allows them to double their efficiency, because they can be building modular parts whilst they're actually constructing excavations.
On a webinar this morning that we had with we sat on, which was giving us an update on Sizewell C, they were talking about lessons learned from Hinckley, and they're going to bring in straight rebar on trains to the site, and then they're going to have something called a cut and bend factory.
Yeah.
Where they're going to actually bend the steel on site.
Yeah, because the integrity of the steel rebar inside a concrete construction is absolutely fundamental for nuclear, because it has to be of a certain strength to withstand events like earthquakes, tsunamis, God forbid. I don't think there would be a tsunami here, but you never know. So they have to be able to map out every single item that goes into the concrete structure. And those innovations have been developed at Hinkley Point C. So for them to be able to transfer that knowledge from Somerset to Suffolk is really important. But I think, the point is, the replication doesn't mean that the Suffolk supply chain is going to be not used. The supply chain that exists in Suffolk will be used, particularly people power. They need lots of workers, because the whole idea is to spread the knowledge amongst a workforce and to create local supply chains, because that's the only way they can make it efficient.
Absolutely. They were talking on the webinar this morning about a taxi rank at their office in London, and the first people off the taxi rank are heading towards Sizewell now. So these are people who have built up their experience at Sizewell, working in a central location, and they are migrating into the Suffolk area to bring their expertise and start recruiting and looking for people through the Employment Affairs Unit, which they've set up to post all the opportunities.
That's where video and visual communications has a very strong part to play at Sizewell, because the training that it can give to, when you think of the workforce that's going to be required on site, it's absolutely vast. At the moment at Hinckley, I think they're up to 9,000 people working on a 24-hour shift pattern. It's a lot of people in a small space. So in order to keep people safe, in order to make sure that they're efficient when they're working, and in order to be able to keep the compliance and the efficiency up to date, they need to have a tool that's a mass tool for mass communication. And that's where we work very closely with the teams at Hinckley to produce training video.
When you think about it, it's actually by definition, this is a construction site, a very large construction site. And I want to talk about scale in a minute, but it changes every day. So because you're building and the everything, sometimes you're going to come in on a Monday and you're not going to recognise where you're working because so much has happened from the previous week.
Yeah.
There's going to be an enormous number of people working on site. Year 6, we're going to be up to about 10,000 people. There's going to be multiple languages spoken, multiple cultures working on site. So to be able to use visual communication to get your essential messages across, does it often start from like static images saying this is what you must do and this is what you mustn't do, which then maybe possibly leads on to the taking full advantage of moving images and sound and overhead shots and everything else?
Yes, I think there are various genres of visual communications and the whole point is to try and keep them up to date and engaging. And I think your point about a lot of languages on site is very pertinent. We actually, at the beginning, when we started working particularly with bylaw, I think they had something like 32 languages represented in their workforce. And we were asked to create a non-verbal training series for very sort of kind of fundamental compliance activities. So things like working at height, road plant, tethering, very simple activities, but very basic to working on a platform. And so we came up with an idea of a sort of a before and after scenario. So bad practice, and then you show the good practice. But we did it non-verbally through, and we produced an animation series of, I think it was 24 modules. And these were rolled out across the site. But actually, we created a Hinkley Point C in animation. And we've got the whole Hinkley Point C world, but circa, 2019 or 2020. So it's very outdated now. It doesn't look the same, even our animation world. And those animations have been used repeatedly. And that's the other thing about having a deliverable file. You can put it pretty much anywhere and you can deliver it from a server to laptops. But mainly they use at Hinckley, they're now using tablets. So when the supervisors are giving their morning briefing, they'll be reading the instructions off a tablet, and they can plug their tablets into screens in the platform offices, and they can do sort of improvised workshops very quickly to show the do's and don'ts, particularly if new equipment's coming on site. So that was one of the early non-verbal training series that we did. We're still doing the kind of before and after scenarios, the do's and don'ts, but we're actually more and more working with senior training representatives on site for them to deliver impromptu talks. Very often they're not available to get round the whole site because it's enormous. I mean, it's huge. And so if you record them an interview or record them doing a presentation, you can then roll that out across site and off site for the supply chain, because very often lots of the workforce are working off site, or they're on holiday, or they're on leave. And if you deliver the training video in a platform where you can ensure that they've actually watched it, so in a software where you can see whether you can track what they've been doing and whether they've understood it, it's invaluable.
Let's try and explain to the listeners in terms about something about the scale and the challenges that we have to face when we're looking at these types of projects. So Sizewell C is heavily laden with replication from Hinckley, as we've already mentioned, and it's got to be delivered on time and on budget. But at the same time, safety and productivity have got to be right up there, and looking after the environment and supporting social enterprise and aspects like this. But if you and I 20 years ago were asked to go to a meeting on a construction site, we would typically turn up at a fence, and you might see the standard health and safety signs on the fence as you walk in. The first challenge is, where do I park? So the visitor slots are all filled up, and you find a slot to abandon your car in, and then you somehow got to walk to the office safely. Certainly My experience of last week is that the signage at Sizewell C is huge. It's in multiple locations. The ever expanding car park is, as long as you follow the signs and the markings on the road and the barriers, you aren't going to be run over by a car. And you have to sign in, you have your photograph taken, and you start every meeting with a safety briefing. With Sizewell, the safety business briefings are going to happen at 7:30 in the morning, which is a challenge, especially when a number of people having to travel distance to get to site. So it's for a lot of SMEs who are listening to this, it's going to be quite different to many projects that they're working on at the moment.
I think, first of all, the scale, it is an enormous project. In terms of the workforce, it's lots of disparate companies in the supply chain coming together to form teams. The safety element, I can't stress enough the amount of work and attention to detail that is put into safety at Hinkley Point C. Logistically, getting people onto site for a 7:00 safety briefing, you're not driving onto site at Hinkley, you are getting a bus from a park and ride. So the journey to site, it might take more like 40 minutes from Bridgewater to the actual location. But you've got to park in a car park. You have to be badged for that car park. You have to get onto buses, which obviously at the peak of rush hour, which is between 5:30 and 8:00, are very full, double-decker buses, and they run up to site. So you could be looking, even if you're living, I don't know, within 20 minutes of the car parks, you're looking at a 2-hour journey. So for my film crews to get onto site from Bristol, it takes them minimum 2 hours.
So you're getting up at 4 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning to be there on time.
I did a consultancy for bylaw, a communications consultancy, and I had to be, because I wanted to go around all the platforms and see the supervisors and what they did in their briefings, I was up at 3
o'clock
to get there for their pre-briefing talk. So the supervisors have a pre-brief before they go onto their platform and then talk to their teams. I have to say that the construction element at Hinkley Point C is run very much like an army. It's a disciplined environment. It has to be, because it's very crammed. You have to know what you're doing. The wraparound, so in the modular offices that you're seeing going up, that's the support staff. I don't know at Sizewell whether it will be the same as Hinkley. They've got 4 major offices on site, but even those are getting full. So they periodically move people out to Bridgewater. There's also the element of PPE. You're not allowed to wear your PPE on the buses into site. You have to go to your locker. So within those office spaces, there's a locker. There's welfare and canteens. The actual logistics of keeping people safe is huge.
Incredible, yeah.
And it's really important, because it would be so easy. And there have been incidents at Hinkley, thankfully not that many, where just a slight attention to detail, to not walking in the right place, have caused accidents. But I think it's the care that's been taken over the health and safety has provided a fairly good working environment. It's
a different world to what a lot of people in sort of junior management positions are used to when they're supplying services to such a project. And human relationships, right down to the individual dumper truck driver, to somebody who's managing a project for delivery for his client or for his employer, the people who are going to pay his wages, are going to be essential. Do you find that the tier ones use visual communication to help them brief their staff and keep everybody on the same page? When I started providing video and photography at Hinkley Point in roughly about 2018, video was very much an add-on. You know, video communications was seen as something that was nice to have, not integral to the health and safety messaging. That's completely changed. And that's because the whole landscape of how you communicate has changed. The fact that you can now give safety briefings to your employees off-site on a phone means that it is the preeminent tool of show and tell for safety. But other than that, at Hinkley, they actually have
screens in the canteen. And they show updates because there's also the feel-good factor. You want to build morale in your workforce. You want to show that they're doing a good job. And most people are working in silos, both in the construction and in terms of office administration. They don't they'll see the site going up around them, but they don't see the little wins. And so the video communications that are used in the canteens are quite powerful. And they're on 24 hours. So you can mix and match between health and safety briefings and also look what we did yesterday. So it's a very powerful tool.
Yeah. So it's it helps you remind yourself about looking after yourself. I mean, down at the golf club in Felixstowe now, we've got new information boards. So they're online devices, quite tall. They're about probably 2 meters high by about a meter wide. Reminding you about the symptoms of strokes and how to keep yourself hydrated and looking after your own health. So it's not possible for a line manager at Sizewell to be able to speak to everybody who's working there on a daily basis. So we can have these visual prompts in front of us. And
I think for me, the Suffolk element is hugely important. That particularly for people who are listening to this who are considering applying for a tender or getting involved in the supply chain. It's been quite a long journey in Somerset to get the supply chain sorted there. So working in Somerset for Hinkley Point C has prompted me to look very carefully at what's happening in Suffolk with Sizewell C. And although we're talking a lot about Hinkley Point C and replication, I think it's important for your listeners to know that there is going to be an enormous amount of opportunity for the Suffolk supply chain. And that's one of the reasons that I've been in a joint venture. I started a joint venture company to provide visual communications with a Suffolk-based videography company. And we've been working here now for over 2.5 years. We've done some work for Sizewell C. But more than that, we've tried to engage with potential suppliers to the project. And our company, Woodbridge Digital Media, is determined that we will use local videographers, photographers, editors, production managers, compliance partners to make it work, because that is part of the whole project. It's part of what we believe in. We've done it in Somerset. We want to do it here in Suffolk. And I see that the integration of replication from Hinkley Point C, lessons learnt, and the fresh new supply chain in Suffolk can come together really efficiently and well and make great strides, because UK Limited needs to have a workforce, not just in Somerset, but it needs to have the whole workforce understanding how to do nuclear construction, because then we can go out to the world and say we are leaders in this.
And export the skills.
Suffolk
County Council, Jay Rathata, who heads up their economic development department, is always talking about exporting our skills out of Suffolk.
Absolutely. And that knowledge transfer from Somerset shouldn't be a threat.
No.
It should be an opportunity where the two workforces come together to learn and build a very strong and robust knowledge base.
So as someone who's trying to win work at Sizewell, you're looking to differentiate yourself from your competitors. You need to be able to demonstrate and show how good you are. In our Super Suffolk Suppliers series that we did with you, and you helped us with the filming, we looked at a fluid company called Dynamic Fluid Solutions, Ben Buckmaster. We looked at an industrial laundry, but probably the most environmentally friendly laundry in Europe, called Swiss Camplings in Great Yarmouth. S&P Ventilation, who look at air circulation. Bell Coaches, the local coaching company in Suffolk, who will be working for a number of tier ones providing transportation services, but also they'll be able to use their whole infrastructure in terms of supporting the project. So we talked about this morning about efficiency, and efficiency is going to health delivering on time to cost. But we've also talked about getting the message across so that there aren't any incidences where risk interrupts this project.
That's right. I mean, if there is an incident on site, it has to stop. All activity has to stop. There has to be an assessment of safety. There has to be an investigation. So, it's a win-win situation for the safety and compliance to be absolutely spot on. You want to keep the site working, particularly for Sizewell C, where there is big pressure on delivering on time. We all know that Hinkley Point C has run over. Obviously, it's unforeseen circumstances like COVID did not help the project. But I think Sizewell C is going to be under increasing pressure to get things done because they're using replication, because systems have been invented and put in place. So the risk of something happening on site just has to be zero.
Yeah. Because a lot of the above ground nuclear fixtures and fittings that are going to be fitted are literally a cut and paste version from Hinkley. They don't need to go for certification again.
The size of everything is huge. I mean, we filmed just before Christmas the stator generator, which is part of the turbine hall, being bought from it. We filmed it coming from Cummage Wharf, which is the equivalent of one of the piers that's going to be built at Sizewell. It's about a 6-mile journey. So we filmed that coming up the River Parrot, being discharged onto the wharf, being bought by an SMPT to up to site. And then we filmed it coming into the turbine hall and then being lifted by a massive crane into position. It's huge. It's I think it's 900 tons. It's absolutely enormous. And those kind of logistical operations are like 2 years in the planning. The equipment is enormous. It's precision equipment. It can't be jolted or jarred. It has to be very carefully handled. You can't have someone falling under the wheels of a slow-moving vehicle on the journey to getting the big piece of equipment. I mean, it would put the operation back a year, potentially. So I think the attention to detail in terms of compliance is fundamental. And apart from that, it's important for the workforce to feel that they're safe. They need to feel that they're going to work and they're going to be able to come away from work in one piece. They need to feel that they're in an environment. Sometimes there's a lot of moaning about, people telling them to do up their jackets, their PPE, or in the summer when it's hot, wearing long sleeve jackets. But I think everybody on site does recognise the reasons for it.
And a lot of time and effort would be going into making sure that the PPE they're being issued with not only helps them, protects them from the risks that can't be eliminated to do their work, but also it's going to take into account the weather and I think the different temperatures they're going to have to cope with.
That's where video communications and visual communications really helps, because it starts to create that culture. There can be no everything has to be done first time. There can be no failure. There is really no second chance. And that kind of is strict, firm, but it does work.
The closing shots of the webinar we've just seen were how the project is going to support social enterprise. And there's a picture of a veteran who is working for the Royal British Legion, and he's lost both his lower limbs. And there he is with his replacement limbs working on this project. And so the workforce will be very inclusive. It's going to reflect society. These people who have served and to look after us are going to be given opportunities on the project, fulfilling careers and all this type of stuff, which is going to be essential. And with the future challenges, looking after the environment, and they're talking about eliminating diesel involvement on site. So looking at all sorts of alternative fuels and supporting social enterprise. Those messages can all be used very effectively using visual communications as well, Nicky.
And I think going back to the series that we produced last May, Super Suffolk Suppliers, to get right down into the supply chain and to talk to leaders of companies that will have an opportunity to work with the tier ones. For me, it was a privilege to actually hear what they had to say. And I think for them, it was an occasion where they could actually have slightly longer to explain what they do, how big their workforce were, where they were based, and what it would mean to them in terms of their growth, their business growth in Suffolk, if they did, become part of the supply chain. And I was amazed actually by the quality. I mean, the quality of the existing companies in Suffolk that will be able to work in the supply chain. It's amazing. They're already here. And I think that's where you can use video effectively to try and get your message in front of the procurement teams at the project.
I mean, we live on what we call colloquially here the energy coast. Got its antecedents back in oil and gas exploration, but also one of the world's largest wind farms off the North Sea. We've got the country's largest port, literally on the doorstep of the Port of Felixstowe, on the doorstep of the project. And to support these developments, including maybe national grid as well. So there's this debate about how we're going to get the power from the North Sea to the substations. A workforce has been built up over the years. And so I think that is a big difference between East Anglia, Sizewell, compared with Hinckley on the River Severn, in that there is a well-established workforce locally here who need to be trained, possibly, and upskilled, maybe look at something completely
different.
And
they need to get their message out, because the Sizewell C procurement teams will be so busy. It's all hands to the pump now. The project's going live. They need to stand up and wave their hands in the air and say, look at us. Maybe not so much to the Sizewell C company, but certainly to the tier one companies that are coming to support the project. They need to be out there being visible. They need to make themselves visible to show and tell what they can do. It gives them a bit of an edge against potentially global competitors or people coming from other areas of the UK. So if you're really invested in getting a contract on the project, you need to go that extra mile. You need to be fully committed, because your marketing, not so much marketing in terms of flyers and leaflets and websites, but in terms of you yourself putting yourself forward and being in the eye of the viewer, who is the project, is really important.
So crime of the century would be projects being placed with a supplier, but with the procurement team not being aware of your company. So by using all those methods you've just spoken about, that would be essential. And I think on our platform, the VARTAN Way, where we have a URL which is bid for SZC, we're using the number 4, we're going to be reflecting all these ideas on the website, Nicky. So thank you very much for your help today and your contribution to the podcast. Thank you everyone for listening. We'll be developing future episodes as we go forward, but trying to relate it very specifically to this fast moving project that is literally happening on our doorstep. Look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Thank you for listening to the Compliance Experts Podcast. We highly value your input and welcome any questions, thoughts or challenges for us to tackle in forthcoming episodes. VARTAN Consultancy pride themselves in helping customers manage risk and subsequently helping them improve their overall company performance. To speak to Miles and his team, visit VARTANconsultancy.com. This podcast is produced and managed by podtalk.co.uk and is the copyright of VARTAN Consultancy. This podcast is created for entertainment purposes only. Views and opinions are that of VARTAN Consultancy and their guests. Information recorded in this episode was deemed correct at the time of recording. However, we advise you to always check with VARTAN Consultancy for up-to-date information and legislation.